You're listening to the Vocabit Podcast, where I help students improve their vocabulary for the SAT, ACT, and life itself using my unique and research-backed story-based method. On this podcast, I'm sharing the best tips and tricks for a more enriched vocabulary and pain-free test day. Hello, and welcome to episode 39 of the Vocabit Podcast. I'm Erica Abbott, a former English and history teacher, the author of the young adult novel Ahead of Her Time, and the founder of the eponymously named vocabulary company Vocabit. I don't know why I always feel the need to explain how the idea for each episode came about, but I think it's because since I like the story, I personally also like to know the backstory to things, so maybe you feel the same. This episode is kind of the brainchild of two earlier ones. In the last episode, we talked about how a shibboleth went from a stalk of grain to a distinguishing feature about a group of people. The meaning of this word totally changed over time. And a number of episodes before that, we had that funny little vocabulary-boosting short story, Karen and the Weed. And Karen is another example of language evolving before our eyes, of us taking a pretty innocuous name and giving it an entirely new meaning. And I got to thinking about how this isn't the first time we've taken someone's name and turned it into an insult, especially with traitors. If you look at history, there's definitely a name insult overlap with traitors. If someone is a Benedict Arnold, you probably know that it also means that they're a traitor. But there's another one that might not be part of your lexicon, and it dates back to World War II. At this time, there was a Norwegian politician by the name of Vidkun Quisling who was a big fan of Hitler. He founded Norway's fascist party, and I think you can get where I'm going with this. He wasn't a good guy. He actually tried to take over the Norwegian government when the Germans invaded in 1940. After the king fled, he basically hopped on the radio and was like, "I'm your leader now, Norwegians." And he basically hoped that because he was a fascist, maybe the Germans would just let him stay there. They kind of did, actually, but they made it very clear that he was a puppet president. They were in charge of Norway. He reported to the Germans, but he ended up leading they call it, the collaborationist government in Norway during World War II. Because the Norwegians were, by and large, ideologically not synced up with him, they did not want to be Nazi puppets, they quickly started using the term Quisling as another word for traitor or collaborator. And already by 1941, we'd picked it up in English. Good old Winston Churchill helped project this word as an insult to the people during a BBC radio broadcast. He said, "A vile race of quislings, to use a new word which will carry the scorn of mankind down the centuries, is hired to fawn upon the conqueror, to collaborate in his designs, and to enforce his rule upon their fellow countrymen while groveling low themselves." End quote. And even before that, in 1940, The Times published a really linguistically kind of actually fun and fascinating piece, and here's what The Times said. "Major Quisling has added a new word to the English language. To writers, the word Quisling is a gift from the gods. If they had been ordered to invent a new word for traitor, they could hardly have hit upon a more brilliant combination of letters. Orally, and that's A-U-R, which means to the ear, it contrives to suggest something at once slippery and tortuous. Visually, it has the supreme merit of beginning with a Q, which, with one august exception, which they're talking about the Queen there, has long deemed to the British mind to be a crooked, uncertain, and slightly disreputable letter, suggestive of the questionable, the querulous, the quavering of quaking quagmires and quivering quicksands, of quibbles and quarrels, of queasiness, quackery, qualms, and quilp." End quote. I would like to add that I think the ing ending adds to its value as an insult as well. Ing words are usually inanimate, like a thing, or if something is of trifling importance, it's not very important. It's a very belittling way to end a word, which is nice for an insult. So there you have it. A Quisling is a traitor or collaborator named after a Norwegian politician. You probably know Benedict Arnold. It's time you also know Quisling. If someone's a Quisling, they're a traitor.